The massive space station HFY floated silently in the void between two star systems like a metal island in an ocean of darkness. Its gleaming hull reflected the light from distant stars while inside its corridors buzzed with activity from dozens of different alien species. Today was special because it marked the first time in galactic history that humans and Zephyrians would sit at the same table to discuss peace. Captain Jake Morrison walked through the station's main corridor with steady steps that showed his military training. His dark blue uniform was pressed and clean, but his face carried the weight of someone who had seen too many battles. Behind him followed Lieutenant Amy Carter, a young woman with bright eyes and blonde hair tied back in regulation style. She carried a datapad filled with research that had taken months to compile. Commander Steve Burke brought up the rear, his scarred hands and gray hair telling stories of fights won and lost across the galaxy. The three humans drew stares from other species as they passed. Most had never seen humans before except in military reports or propaganda broadcasts. Some whispered among themselves about the newcomers who had somehow carved out territory in space, despite having primitive technology compared to the major powers. Jake stopped at a viewing port and looked out at the Zephyrian battlecruiser docked on the other side of the station. The ship was twice the size of any human vessel and bristled with weapons that could level entire cities. Its black hull was covered in angular designs that made it look like a giant predator waiting to strike. "Nervous, sir?" Amy asked as she joined him at the window. "Just thinking," Jake replied without taking his eyes off the enemy ship. 6 months ago, those guns were pointed at our colonies. Now we're supposed to sit down and have tea with them. "Steve," snorted from behind them. "Tea might be too civilized for this bunch. I've seen what they do to prisoners." Amy frowned at the older man's comment. As the team's xenobiologist, she had spent years studying alien cultures, including the Zephyrians. "They're not monsters, Commander. They have their own code of honor even if we don't understand it." "Honor," Steve muttered. "That's what they called it when they glassed 3 mining stations in the Outer Rim." Jake held up a hand to stop the argument before it could start. They had been through this debate many times during the journey to HFY. The truth was that none of them really knew what to expect from their enemies turned negotiation partners. The diplomatic conference room was located in the station's neutral zone where no single species held authority. As they entered, Jake saw that the Zephyrians had already arrived and were seated on the far side of a long metal table. The sight of them in person was more intimidating than any video transmission could convey. General HFY dominated the alien delegation like a mountain of muscle and natural armor. He stood 8 feet tall with reptilian features and skin that looked like it could stop bullets. His eyes were yellow with vertical pupils that tracked every movement the humans made as they entered. Thick arms crossed over his chest showed off claws that could tear through steel. 2 smaller Zephyrians flanked their general, but they were still larger than any human. Their species had evolved on a high-gravity world where only the strong survived, and it showed in every line of their powerful bodies. They wore minimal clothing that displayed their natural armor plating like badges of honor. "So, these are the famous humans," General HFY's voice rumbled through the room's translation system. "Smaller than I expected." Jake took his seat across from the alien general and met his gaze without flinching. Years of command had taught him that showing weakness to predators only encouraged them to attack. "General HFY, thank you for agreeing to these talks. Do not mistake necessity for courtesy, human. My Emperor wishes to end this conflict quickly so we can focus on more important matters." Amy activated her datapad and began pulling up star charts of the disputed territory. The Kepler sector contained 17 star systems that both species claimed as their own. Human colonists had been living on several planets for decades, while Zephyrian battle fleets had recently begun patrol sweeps through the same space. "If we could begin with the territorial boundaries," Amy said in her most diplomatic voice. "Our records show that human settlements predate any Zephyrian claims to these systems." General HFY's eyes narrowed to thin slits as he studied the data Amy projected onto the room's main screen. The star chart showed colony ships launched from Earth 50 years ago, along with detailed logs of planetary surveys and settlement. Construction. Fabricated evidence, the general snarled. Your species barely had spaceflight when we were conquering star systems. Amy's cheeks flushed red, but she kept her voice steady. These records are verified by multiple sources, including neutral trading posts and lies. Kethver slammed his fist onto the table with enough force to make the metal surface ring like a bell. You dare insult us with false documents? Jake leaned forward in his chair. General, I understand this information might be surprising, but Lieutenant Carter has spent months verifying every detail. Perhaps if we could examine the evidence together. There is nothing to examine. The alien general rose from his seat to his full intimidating height. You pathetic creatures think you can steal our rightful territory with paper and ink? Steve's hand moved instinctively toward his sidearm, but Jake caught his eye and shook his head slightly. Violence here would doom any chance of peace unlikely. Start a war that humanity could not win. Amy stood up and walked around the table toward a wall display that could show larger images. General, if you would just look at the archaeological evidence from New Portland Colony. The settlement patterns clearly show. Her words were cut off as General Kethver backhanded her across the face with his armored gauntlet. The blow lifted Amy off her feet and sent her flying across the room to crash into the metal bulkhead with a sound that made everyone wince. She crumpled to the floor and lay motionless while blood began pooling beneath her head. The room fell silent except for the hum of the station's life support systems. Jake stood slowly and walked over to where Amy lay unconscious. He knelt beside her and checked for a pulse while his face remained completely calm. Her heartbeat was weak but steady, and she was breathing on her own. A large cut on her forehead was bleeding freely and would need medical attention soon. Standing up, Jake turned to face General Kethver, who was watching him with satisfaction at having made his point about human weakness. The alien expected anger or fear or perhaps begging for mercy. Instead, Jake's voice was quiet and controlled when he spoke. General Kethver, by the ancient laws of combat honor that your people hold sacred, I challenge you to single battle for the unprovoked attack on an officer under my protection. The general's satisfied expression changed to surprise and then to cruel amusement. In all his years of conquest, no member of an inferior species had ever dared challenge him to personal combat. General Kethver threw back his massive head and laughed so loudly that the sound echoed off the conference room walls. His yellow eyes gleamed with cruel amusement as he looked down at the human captain who barely reached his shoulder. The idea that this tiny creature would challenge him to combat was the funniest thing he had heard in years. You cannot be serious, human, the general said between laughs. Do you know how many warriors I have killed in single combat? Do you understand what Zephyrian battle claws can do to soft human flesh? Jake stood perfectly still with his hands at his sides as he waited for the alien's laughter to fade. His face showed no emotion, but something cold and dangerous flickered behind his dark eyes. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who had commanded soldiers in life and death situations. I invoke the right of Kavtar under your people's ancient warrior code. You have spilled the blood of one under my protection without cause or warning. Honor demands satisfaction through combat. The laughter died on Kethver's lips as he realized the human actually knew Zephyrian law. Kavtar was an old tradition that even modern Zephyrian military still recognized. Any warrior who harmed a protected person could be challenged by their guardian. To refuse such a challenge would bring dishonor that could destroy a career and family name. Sub-Commander Yextai leaned close to his general's ear and whispered urgently in their native language. The smaller Zephyrian's concern was obvious even without translation. Jake had expertly trapped them using their own customs against them. You know our ways better than expected, Kethver said slowly as he studied the human with new interest. But knowledge will not save you from death. I accept your challenge. Commander Steve Burke stepped forward with alarm written across his weathered face. Jake, you can't be serious about this. Look at the size difference. He's got natural armor and claws that can cut through our best body armor. The challenge is given and accepted, Jake replied without taking his eyes off the Zephyrian general. The combat will follow traditional rules. No weapons beyond what nature provided and what basic gear allows. Amy Carter groaned softly from where she still lay on the floor. Jake immediately knelt beside her and helped her sit up against the wall. Blood had stopped flowing from her head wound, but she looked pale and confused. "What happened?" she asked, weakly while touching the cut on her forehead. "You were struck during negotiations," Jake said gently. "Medical help is on the way." Amy's eyes widened as memory returned and she saw General Kethver looming over them. "Captain, he hit me because I was showing him evidence about the colonies. The archaeological data proves humans were there first." "I know," Jake said as he helped her stand on unsteady legs, "and he's going to answer for that." 2 Station Security. Officers arrived with a medical team who quickly took charge of Amy's care. As they helped her from the room, she grabbed Jake's arm with surprising strength. "Don't do this, sir. The data is more important than revenge. We need those colony records to secure the peace treaty." Jake patted her hand reassuringly. "This isn't about revenge, Lieutenant. Sometimes diplomacy requires a different kind of language." After Amy was taken to the medical bay, the remaining humans and Zephyrians worked out the details of combat. HFY had a large arena used for various ceremonial purposes and sporting events. The fight would take place in 6 hours to give both participants time to prepare. News of the challenge spread through the station faster than a computer virus. Within an hour, representatives from dozens of alien species were requesting permission to witness the combat. Most had never seen a human fight and were curious about the species that had somehow survived contact with the Zephyrian Empire. General Kethver returned to his ship to prepare, while his subordinates spread word of the upcoming victory throughout Zephyrian space. They saw this as a perfect opportunity to demonstrate their superiority over the upstart humans once and for all. Jake made his way to the station's training facility, accompanied by Steve, who kept trying to talk him out of the fight. The gym was equipped with various exercise machines and combat training equipment used by different species. "This is suicide, Jake," Steve said as he watched his captain begin stretching exercises. "That thing weighs twice what you do and has skin like tank armor. What are you trying to prove?" "I'm not trying to prove anything," Jake replied as he moved through a series of warm-up routines. "Sometimes a leader has to do what's necessary regardless of the odds." Steve shook his head in frustration. Amy was right. The colony data is what matters. We could take this to the Galactic Council and present our evidence through proper channels. Jake paused in his exercises and fixed Steve with a steady gaze. "And how long would that take? Months? Years?" Meanwhile, Zephyrian battle fleets are moving through human space, threatening our colonies. Those people need protection now, not after a long legal process. The truth was more complicated than Jake wanted to explain. He had seen the fear in Amy's eyes when she woke up. He had watched her courage crumble as she realized how easily the alien had hurt her. That kind of fear could spread through the human delegation and destroy any chance of negotiating from a position of strength. More importantly, Jake understood something about bullies that Steve did not. Sometimes the only language they respected was force. General Kethver had struck Amy to demonstrate that humans were weak prey animals who could be intimidated. Unless that perception changed, no treaty would be worth the paper it was printed on. Jake spent the next 4 hours in physical and mental preparation. He ran through combat drills that he had learned during years of military service. He studied video recordings of Zephyrian anatomy, looking for weak points in their natural armor. He meditated to clear his mind of anger and focus only on the task ahead. Steve remained with him throughout the preparation time, gradually accepting that nothing would change Jake's mind. Eventually, the older soldier began helping by holding training pads and offering tactical advice. "Remember, they're top-heavy," Steve said as Jake practiced low attacks. "All that upper body muscle makes them less stable if you can get them off balance." "I know," Jake replied between combinations. "I've been thinking about this fight since the moment he hit Amy. As the appointed time approached, Jake changed into lightweight tactical gear and checked his equipment one final time. The rules allowed for basic protection and standard combat tools, but nothing that could be considered an advanced weapon. Standing at the arena entrance, Jake could hear the crowd gathering inside. Hundreds of aliens from across the galaxy had come to witness this unprecedented challenge between species. For many, it would be their first real look at human capabilities. Commander Burke stood beside him, looking worried but determined to support his captain regardless of personal doubts. "Any last words of wisdom?" Steve asked. Jake smiled grimly as he prepared to enter the arena. "Yeah, don't let them bury me in this uniform. Amy would never forgive me for getting blood on her favorite color." The arena on HFY had been built to host sporting events between different alien species, but today it felt more like a coliseum from ancient Earth. Hundreds of beings from across the galaxy filled the circular seating areas, their various languages creating a buzz of excitement that filled the air with anticipation. Most had never seen humans in person, and fewer still had witnessed Zephyrian combat. Jake Morrison entered through the south gate wearing lightweight tactical armor that looked primitive compared to the advanced equipment other species used. His gear was simple black polymer plating over vital areas with a basic utility belt containing standard tools. No weapons were visible except for what appeared to be a combat knife strapped to his thigh. The crowd grew quiet as they got their first good look at the human challenger. Many had expected someone larger based on the stories they had heard about human military prowess. Jake appeared almost fragile next to the massive aliens in the audience, let alone compared to what was coming through the north gate. General HFY entered like a walking tank wrapped in ceremonial battle armor that gleamed under the arena lights. The Zephyrian military dress uniform was designed to intimidate enemies, and today it served its purpose perfectly. Polished metal plates covered his natural armor, while energy claws extended from specially designed gauntlets that crackled with contained power. The size difference was even more dramatic in the open space of the arena floor. HFY stood 8.5 feet tall and weighed nearly 400 pounds of solid muscle and bone. His reptilian features were set in a confident expression that suggested this would be over quickly. Jake looked like a child standing across from him. Station Commander Vexhai, a neutral party from the Centauri Federation, served as the official referee for the combat. His forearms gestured for attention as he announced the rules to the gathered crowd through the arena's translation system. "This is formal combat under ancient Zephyrian law," the commander's voice echoed through the space. "The challenge was issued for honor satisfaction following unprovoked violence. Combat continues until one participant yields, becomes unable to continue, or dies. No outside interference will be tolerated." Jake rolled his shoulders and stretched his neck as he studied his opponent across the arena floor. The energy claws were the main threat, but they also represented an opportunity if he could find a way to use them against their wielder. Years of military training had taught him that every weapon was also a weakness in the right circumstances. "General." HFY began moving forward with the confidence of a predator approaching cornered prey. His steps were heavy and deliberate, designed to intimidate through sheer presence. The energy claws hummed with power as he flexed his massive hands. "Last chance to surrender, human," the general called out loudly enough for the entire arena to hear. "Kneel before Zephyrian might, and I will make your death quick." Jake said nothing in response, but began moving in a wide circle around his opponent. His steps were light and balanced, keeping his center of gravity low while maintaining distance from those deadly claws. The crowd murmured at his apparent retreat. HFY grew tired of the circling and launched himself forward with surprising speed for something so large. His first strike would have decapitated most beings, but Jake was no longer where the claw passed through empty air. The human had dropped low and rolled to the side, coming up behind the general's left flank. The arena crowd gasped as Jake's combat knife appeared in his hand and struck at what looked like a gap in the Zephyrian's armor. The blade skittered off natural bone plating, without doing any damage, but the speed of the attack surprised everyone watching, including HFY himself. "Impossible," the general snarled as he spun around faster than anything his size should. Have been able to move, you cannot match the Furian reflexes. Jake backpedaled quickly as energy claws slashed through the space where he had been standing. The smell of ozone filled the air where the weapons ionized atmospheric particles. One direct hit from those claws would end the fight permanently. What the crowd was witnessing was something no other species had ever demonstrated against Zephyrian warriors. Instead of trying to match strength with strength, Jake was using speed and positioning to avoid damage while looking for opportunities to strike back. It was a completely different approach to combat than anything they had seen before. HFY pressed his attack with a series of powerful strikes that would have overwhelmed any opponent who tried to block them directly. But Jake never stood still long enough to receive the full force of any blow. He ducked under horizontal slashes, rolled away from vertical strikes, and used the general's own momentum against him whenever possible. The human's movement pattern seemed random at first, but careful observers began to notice a method behind the apparent chaos. Jake was studying his opponent with every exchange, learning how the general moved and where his attacks came from. Each near miss taught him something new about Zephyrian combat techniques. After several minutes of this deadly dance, HFY was beginning to show signs of frustration. Sweat beaded on his reptilian features as he realized the human was not fighting like any opponent he had faced before. Most species either tried to match Zephyrian strength or used superior technology to compensate for physical disadvantages. Jake was doing neither of those things. Instead, he fought like something that had evolved to survive against larger predators through cunning and adaptability rather than raw power. Every move was calculated to preserve energy while gathering information about his enemy's capabilities. The turning point came when HFY overextended himself during a particularly vicious attack combination. His energy claws carved deep gouges in the arena floor as Jake rolled between his legs and came up behind him. This time the human's knife found its target in a joint where natural armor plates met. The blade sank 3 inches into alien flesh before HFY could react. The wound was not fatal, but it drew first blood and proved that the mighty Zephyrian general could be hurt by human weapons. A roar of pain and rage echoed through the arena as the general spun around with murder in his yellow eyes. "You dare wound me?" HFY screamed as dark blood seeped through his armor plating. "I will tear you apart piece by piece for this insult." The crowd was on its feet now as they realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. The feared Zephyrian military machine was being challenged by a species most had dismissed as technologically primitive. Jake Morrison was not just surviving against impossible odds, he was actually winning, but the fight was far from over and everyone in the arena knew that a wounded Zephyrian general was infinitely more dangerous than a confident one. HFY's next attack would either end the human threat forever or prove that the galaxy had seriously underestimated what humans were capable of in combat. General HFY's wounded roar shook the arena walls as dark blood continued to seep from the knife wound between his armor plates. The sight of his own blood flowing freely had triggered something primal in the Zephyrian warrior's mind. All pretense of honorable combat vanished as pure animal rage took control of his massive frame. Jake saw the change immediately and knew the real fight was just beginning. The careful, probing attacks and defensive positioning that had worked so far would not be enough against a berserker who no longer cared about self-preservation. He adjusted his stance and prepared for the storm that was coming. The general's next attack came with twice the speed and fury of anything he had attempted before. Energy claws slashed through the air in wild patterns that filled the arena with crackling energy and the smell of burned ozone. Jake barely managed to stay ahead of the deadly weapons as they carved deep gouges in the metal flooring wherever he had been standing. What the crowd witnessed next was a masterclass in human survival, instincts honed by millions of years of evolution. Jake did not try to match the alien's fury or overcome it through superior force. Instead, he channeled his own adrenaline into cold calculation that turned every one of HFY's wild swings into an opportunity when the general overextended. Himself, during a particularly vicious downward strike, Jake was already moving sideways and up. His combat knife found another gap in the natural armor, this time along the alien's ribs. The blade went in deep before Jake rolled away from the inevitable counter-attack. HFY stumbled as pain shot through his torso, but his rage kept him moving forward. His energy claws swept horizontally in an arc that would have cut Jake in half if it had connected. Instead, the human dropped flat and swept the general's legs with a move that sent 400 pounds of alien warrior crashing to the arena floor. The crowd gasped as the mighty Zephyrian general went down, but Jake knew better than to assume the fight was over. He scrambled backward as HFY rolled and came up swinging with reflexes that should have been impossible for something so large. This time one of the energy claws caught the edge of Jake's tactical armor and tore through the polymer plating. Like it was paper! The human felt the heat of the energy weapon pass inches from his ribs as he twisted away. From what could have been a killing blow, blood ran down Jake's side from where the claw had scraped across his skin, but the wound was superficial. More importantly, the near miss had taught him something crucial about the energy weapons. They generated tremendous heat and required a brief charging period between uses. That tiny delay might be enough. HFY pressed his advantage with a combination attack that drove Jake backward across the arena floor. The general's natural armor had protected him from serious damage despite the knife wounds, but his movements were becoming slightly less coordinated as blood loss began to take its toll. Jake noticed the change and began adapting his strategy accordingly. Instead of purely defensive movement, he started incorporating counterattacks that targeted the same wounds he had already opened. Each strike weakened his opponent a little more while the general's own fury worked against him. The turning point came when HFY made a critical error born of desperation and rage. Seeing Jake apparently trapped against the arena wall, the general charged forward with both energy claws extended for a finishing strike that would pin the human like an insect. Jake waited until the last possible second before dropping and rolling between the alien's legs while HFY's momentum carried him face first into the metal wall. The impact was tremendous and left the general stunned for a crucial moment, rising behind his opponent. Jake struck with surgical precision at the nerve cluster he had identified earlier during his study of Zephyrian anatomy. His combat knife found the exact spot where the general's spine met his skull. The blade went in only an inch, but it was enough to send shock waves through the alien's nervous system. HFY collapsed to his knees as his legs suddenly refused to obey his commands. The energy claws flickered and died as his massive hands lost their grip on the weapon controls. For the first time in the fight, he looked truly vulnerable. Jake stepped back and lowered his knife as he watched the general struggle to regain control of his own body. The crowd fell silent as they realized the human had achieved something impossible. One of the Zephyrian Empire's greatest warriors had been brought low by a being half his size using nothing but skill and determination. "Yield," Jake said quietly, but his voice carried clearly in the hushed arena. "You fought with honor, but the battle is over." General HFY's yellow eyes blazed with fury as he struggled to rise from his knees. Pride and military conditioning warred with the reality of his situation. To yield to an inferior species would destroy everything he had built during decades of conquest. "Never," he snarled through clenched teeth. "I am HFY the Destroyer. I have conquered 12 star systems and crushed armies beneath my claws. I will not yield to human filth." Jake's expression remained calm, but something dangerous flickered in his dark eyes. The offer of mercy had been genuine, but it would not be repeated. When HFY managed to regain enough control to lunge forward with one last desperate attack, the human was ready. This time there was no hesitation or restraint in Jake's response. His knife moved with deadly precision to end the threat permanently. But instead of striking a killing blow, he chose a target that would disable rather than destroy. The blade severed tendons in the general's sword arm, making it impossible to wield the energy claws effectively. HFY screamed in pain and frustration as his primary weapon clattered uselessly to the arena floor. The realization that he had been defeated by mercy rather than superior force was perhaps more devastating than any physical wound could have been. Jake, stood over his fallen opponent and spoke loud enough for the entire arena to hear. "This is what humans call restraint, General. We could destroy you, but we choose not to. Remember that when you think about our supposed weakness." The arena erupted in chaos as representatives from dozens of species tried to process what they had just witnessed. A human had not only defeated a Zephyrian general in single combat, but had done so while showing mercy to an enemy, who had offered none in return. For the Zephyrian delegation watching from the stands, their general's defeat represented something far more serious than a single lost fight. It challenged everything they believed about their own superiority and the weakness of other species. The human had proven that strength came in many forms, and theirs was not necessarily the greatest. Station security moved in to provide medical assistance to both combatants while the crowd slowly began to disperse. The fight was over, but its implications would ripple through galactic politics for years to come. Jake Morrison had not just won a battle, he had changed how an entire empire viewed humanity's place in the galaxy. 3 days after the arena combat that shocked the galaxy, General Kethver lay in HFY's medical bay staring at the ceiling while machines monitored his recovery. The Zephyrian's wounds were healing well thanks to advanced alien medical technology, but the damage to his pride would take much longer to mend. For the first time in his military career, he had been defeated in single combat by what his people considered an inferior species. The door to his private room opened and Jake Morrison entered carrying 2 cups of what appeared to be coffee. The human captain looked tired but alert as he pulled up a chair beside the general's bed. His own injuries from the fight were minor and already healing. "Thought you might want some company," Jake said as he set 1 cup on the bedside table within reach of the alien's good arm. "It's not exactly Zephyrian battle brew, but the caffeine should help." Kethver turned his massive head to study the human who had humiliated him in front of representatives from across the galaxy. He expected to see gloating or triumph in Jake's expression, but found only quiet concern for a wounded opponent. "Why are you here?" the general asked in a voice roughened by pain medication. "Have you come to mock the fallen Zephyrian warrior?" Jake shook his head as he sipped from his own cup. "I came because I wanted you to understand something about humans that your intelligence reports probably missed. We don't fight because we enjoy causing pain or proving superiority. We fight to protect what matters to us." The alien's yellow eyes narrowed with confusion at this unexpected response. In Zephyrian culture, victory in combat was about demonstrating dominance and earning the right to rule over the defeated. The concept of fighting purely for protection was foreign to their way of thinking. "You're Lieutenant Carter," Kethver said slowly as memory brought back the events that started this entire conflict. She was presenting evidence about human colonies in the disputed systems. "I struck her because I believe she was lying to steal our rightful territory," Jake nodded calmly. "Amy was doing her job as a scientist and diplomat. She spent months verifying every piece of data to make sure our claims were accurate. When you hit her, you weren't just attacking one person. You were attacking everything humans value about truth and protection of those who serve." The general tried to sit up straighter in his medical bed but winced as the movement pulled at his healing wounds. "I have conquered 12 star systems and defeated armies that outnumbered my forces 10 to 1. How did you, a single human, manage to defeat me in combat?" Jake was quiet for a long moment as he considered how to explain something that went beyond simple military tactics. "Your people are strong, General, probably stronger than humans will ever be. But strength alone isn't enough when facing an opponent who can adapt and learn during a fight." "Adapt?" Kethver repeated the word like he was testing its meaning. "You mean you changed your strategy based on my attacks?" "Every species you've conquered probably tried to match your strength or rely on superior technology to win," Jake explained. "Humans learned long ago that survival isn't about being the biggest or strongest predator. It's about being smart enough to find weaknesses and flexible enough to exploit them." The alien general was silent for several minutes as he processed this information. His entire military career had been built on the belief that Zephyrian physical superiority made them natural rulers of the galaxy. The idea that adaptability could overcome raw power challenged everything he thought he knew about warfare. "There is something else I do not understand," Kethver said finally. "You could have killed me in the arena when I was helpless. Your knife was at my throat and I could not defend myself. Why did you choose mercy instead of victory?" Jake smiled, sadly as he remembered that crucial moment in the fight. "Because killing you wouldn't have protected Amy or secured peace for our colonies. It would have just made you a martyr and given your empire reason to continue the war. Sometimes showing restraint is more powerful than showing force." Down the corridor in another section of the medical bay, Lieutenant Amy Carter was also recovering from her injuries. The concussion she had suffered was healing well, but she still experienced occasional headaches and dizziness. She was sitting up in bed reviewing the colony data on her tablet when Commander Steve Burke entered her room. "How are you feeling today?" Steve asked as he settled into the visitor's chair. "The doctors say you should be cleared for duty by tomorrow." Amy touched the bandage on her forehead where General Kethver's blow had split her skin. "Better. The headaches are getting less frequent." "Any word on how the negotiations are going?" Steve smiled for the first time since the arena combat. "Actually, that's why I came to see you. The Zephyrian delegation requested a formal review of all the colonial evidence you compiled. They want to examine every piece of data with their own scientists present." "That's wonderful news," Amy said with genuine excitement. "If they're willing to look at the evidence objectively, we might actually achieve a lasting peace agreement." The truth was that Jake's victory in the arena had accomplished something that years of traditional diplomacy could not. By defeating General Kethver without killing him, he had proven that humans possessed a form of strength the Zephyrians had never encountered before. It was strength tempered by wisdom and mercy rather than simple dominance. 2 weeks later, the final peace treaty was signed in the same conference room where the conflict had begun. General Kethver attended the ceremony despite his injuries, sitting across from the human delegation with a new understanding of his former enemies. The terms of the agreement were fair to both species. Human colonies that predated Zephyrian claims were recognized as legitimate, while disputed systems with no prior settlement would be jointly administered. More importantly, the treaty established protocols for future disagreements that emphasized investigation and negotiation over military action. As the various delegates signed the formal documents, Amy Carter presented her complete research findings to the assembled representatives. The archaeological evidence she had gathered proved beyond doubt that humans had been peaceful colonists rather than aggressive invaders in the disputed territories. General Kethver listened to her presentation without interruption, occasionally asking technical questions that showed genuine interest in the scientific process. When she finished, he stood slowly and addressed the room in his deep, rumbling voice. "I have spent my career believing that might makes right and the strong should rule the weak," the general said with obvious difficulty. "Recent events have taught me that true strength sometimes means admitting when you are wrong. The human colonies are legitimate and should be recognized as such." After the ceremony, Jake found himself walking through Haven, Prime's observation deck where he had first seen the Zephyrian battle cruiser. The massive warship was still docked at the station, but now it represented cooperation rather than threat. Amy joined him at the viewing port, her head bandage replaced by a small adhesive patch that barely showed her healing wound. "Thank you, Captain," she said quietly. "For everything." Jake shook his head with a slight smile. "You did the hard work, Lieutenant. All that research and evidence gathering made this peace possible. I just provided a demonstration of human determination." As they watched the stars beyond the station's hull, both humans knew they had witnessed something historic. The galaxy had learned that humanity's place among the stars would not be determined by superior technology or overwhelming force, but by their unique combination of adaptability, courage, and the wisdom to know when mercy was stronger than violence.